Let's talk about phase 3 for a little bit. So interventions, adaptations, modifications for phase 3 are kind of a specialized area that is really for those individuals who have progressed through the range to a score of above 7 to the theoretical 10. It's really important to recognize, first of all, that children in phase 3 CVI are not children who are almost like other children their age visually. That children who score 7 may be able to use information in 2 dimension, they may be able to move around familiar areas quite well, they may be able to even show some visual curiosity, but their specific needs are profound. I also want to say that phase 3 CVI is, for many people, the most challenging. And so it's been my experience that most folks who work with kids with CVI become skilled and comfortable and competent first in phase 1, next in phase 2, and then finally their skill set in phase 3 develops and is really becomes solid. So just know that as a backdrop, that if you are challenged by phase 3, you are not alone. But I also want to share with folks that the degree of need a child has in phase 3 is almost inversely related to their score. So the higher the child is on the range, it's really critical to think or to remember that their score does not designate the amount of support they need. That in fact, children in phase 3 CVI are expected to use their vision for almost every task in the day. They may have some difficulties in the lunchroom, or they may have difficulties if they're on a field trip or encountering a novel image and so forth. But they need our support in terms of the very specialized things about phase 3 throughout the day. So it's critical that we recognize that the amount of support is almost inversely related to the score on the range. That's not to say also that children in phase 1 need very little support. It's that it's more easily, it's a more clear-cut path, I think, for people to understand what those interventions should look like. I also want to mention that almost every child who gets into phase 3 begins in phase 1. So when you encounter a child in phase 1, I really ask you to remember that this is not a child who's expected to stay or live or spend their life having vision that's like children in phase 1. Rather, we should think of this as a progression and remember that we never really know what a child's skill level is going to be until they have access to their environment. So we're always building a program and a direction that we expect to be phase 3. In phase 3, this correlates with the improvements and refinements of the ventral stream of vision. So dorsal stream, very intact. Often kids with CVI have very high skill sets using power mobility or participating in orientation and mobility tasks because their dorsal stream vision really helps them avoid big obstacles and so forth. But there's much more to it than that. The development of that what system and the details and the identifying features are still quite challenging. They may have more subtle needs, but may require, in fact, intensive support. These individuals in phase 3 are at risk for misunderstanding about their needs. For example, a child in phase 3 might move freely through a familiar setting, and people think, what vision issue? But may have significant difficulties in novel settings. In fact, it's been my experience that parents are really concerned about professionals who work with their child who almost seem dismissive about the fact that, oh, your child's so much more visually skilled than most of the students on my caseload. It's really important that you look at those subtle needs because they can have a major impact on that child's safety and their learning. Individuals in phase 3 will require specialized adaptations across learning settings and content areas. It will span the day. Will likely require orientation and mobility, and will likely require support in social situations. Social situations for those individuals in phase 3 can be extraordinarily tricky. If you're still having some difficulty identifying faces, that has a huge impact on your life. If you have difficulty with imitation and you can't necessarily see what the kids next to you are doing, you may feel excluded. If you have difficulties in novel settings, you may fall behind and not be included. If you have latency, by the time the ball is coming near you, it's already too late because you may be hit by that ball. And so people may socially think this is not something you should be included in. There are massive social implications to phase 3 as well. It's also important to recognize that individuals in phase 3 rarely reach a CVI range score of 9 or above. So it's critical that your CVI range scores be subject to reliability tests. Do it with your peers. Do it with someone who you think has your skill set or above, so that you make sure when you're assessing that child in phase 3 that you haven't overscored them and thus given them less support than they need. So there are two really big major themes in phase 3, and these really are correlated with the CVI characteristic of complexity. The first theme is that the child in phase 3 will progress through the need to identify targets against increasing amounts of background information. So that crowding effect we talked about, that fish in a frog, where when things become too close together, the child can't recognize the target anymore because it almost fuses into the background. That's one of the big tasks we'll tackle in phase 3. We're also going to help the child not only continue to identify salient features, but to confirm those, enlarge them, and generalize them. The phase 3 environment may require little or no adaptation in familiar environments. Again, sending a funny message to people who are used to visual impairment being something that always requires certain adaptations. Novel sounds or unexpected movement in the environment may be a factor in visual attention. So something that suddenly happens that is unexpected may completely throw the child in phase 3 off the mark. However, most of the sounds around them, if they're common sounds to the environment, may be integrated and not an issue for that child in phase 3. It's also important to recognize that some individuals in phase 3 are misunderstood and sometimes even thought to have some attentional issues. Remember that children in phase 3 are still obligated by movement until that characteristic resolves. And not just obligated the way typically sighted people are, where we notice something moving and get back to our task. We may not even turn our head. We may simply cease for a moment while we remember what that moving thing is. Individuals with CVI can be captivated by movement, where they see a target moving and they simply cannot get back to the task at hand because they are sucked into, they are obligated to attend to the movement. This is very, very important because it is not necessarily true that this child has true ADD or attentional difficulties. It may be the iteration of this characteristic at this high level. Positioning the child with their back toward the flow of traffic while they're working at near can be a simple adaptation to help remedy that. So this is a photograph of a special education classroom in which you see there is a huge collection of things going on. There are, images and objects and a video happening and objects on a tabletop and bookshelves and toy shelves. I will suggest to you that there are children in phase 3 CVI who can actually function quite well in this environment once they know the environment. You can take a child in phase 3 CVI to a new place, and it may even be less complex than this setting, but because of the overwhelming novelty, they may seem very disoriented and very lost. It's not that their vision is changing from minute to minute, hour to hour, day to day, which it doesn't. It's that this novel environment presents a challenge to the child until or unless they can identify some salient feature, some anchor that allows them to get oriented and to begin their spatial understanding of that setting. So what are these salient features that we talk about? Salient features address the acuity in the development of the ventral stream or detail or what system. They are the acuity. So a lot of acuity is not just in the eye. It's not just about a refraction. It really is also about the development of detail vision in the brain. It is part of and at the core of phase 3 CVI. Salient features support the ability for the child to discriminate internal details, defining aspects of images, faces, environments, and symbols. So when you think about a child with a communication system that may be full of symbols that are not photographs, they're not familiar, maybe the child is just beginning to be able to use things in 2-dimension. Until the child knows what they're looking for, until they can really be taught the salient features, they are very often at a loss. We have to be very clear about the fact that these symbols cannot just be presented. They have to be taught. And teaching a child what to look for can be helpful. This is an example from the Bridge School where they have actually embraced a very comprehensive way of looking at children with CVI. And this is just an example of a phase 3 activity, early phase 3 activity, in which a picture of a cat is placed on a black sheet of paper with a channel of light around, outlining the shape of the cat. The salient features are described, and the child is actually encouraged to look for those salient features, first with the light supporting the child's attention, and later the ability to actually find those pointy or triangle ears and the whiskers. There are children who have who can demonstrate the ability to recognize salient features in some interesting ways. That when children are presented with objects that share traits but are still different or still the same, they have to perform a comparative thought activity. They have to think about, how are these things like things I know, and how are they different? How are they going to know that if they don't know salient features? So that's the prerequisite. In this image, this child arranged these animals in my office in this little collection. And I said, well, my goodness, what do we have here? And she said, these are things that live in a zoo. And we have Arctic tigers and zebras and an elephant and actually a horse and a dog. I'm not so sure, without asking her more questions about all of that information, but what was really powerful to me was that she actually had somehow a zoo representation, a scheme for zoo animals are not the same as animals maybe that live on the farm. So this was a very interesting thing to me. I also want to share that for her to be able to see the difference, that not all black and white animals are zebras. Not all black and white animals with stripes are zebras. That in this case, 2 of these animals are zebras and 2 of them are Arctic tigers. She was able to put these things in sets where they belonged as same. She was able to see the salient features, use comparative thought, how are these alike, how are these different, and come up with the fact that they are not exactly the same animal. That's a lot of detail vision. That's a lot of representational thought. And when I see a child who can do this, I think it's very possible we can approach literacy in terms of words. Words may not be more difficult than her ability to see these very subtle salient features. If she can see the salient features in those animals, the next question is, well, let's see what we can do with sight words. Do sight words have salient features? If she's already understood the concept, perhaps I can introduce a set of symbols, such as letters. The child obviously needs letter-sound association for literacy. We can talk about the spelling of the word. This word is spelled C-U-P. The salient features of this word are that this is a short word. It has the letter C at the beginning, which is like an O but has a little opening in it. At the end is a letter P. That's that letter that has a circle with a line. This line is on the left of the circle. You can use whatever language works but to help the child see the salient features in those letters. What we don't want to do is have a child actually have to analyze every letter within a word, because that will probably be a complexity challenge that will be overwhelming. So sight words can be a helpful tool in this process. In this case, this child is asked to match the word. There's a picture of a cup, the word cup. The next prompt is, can you show me which one of these shapes fits that word cup? And what you see is the child is actually given the opportunity to place that word shape within the proper form, thus confirming that, yes, she does know the salient features, that she can actually see that there is a shape that kind of matches that. It will help her ultimately read faster, with greater fluency, and hopefully much greater comprehension. And again, literacy is just critical. So we, in this slide, see that the principles of light, backlighting on the iPad, color, and low complexity help this child learn those letter shapes, talk about the salient features of the letters so that they can be put into words using that letter shape as a support, but the word shape as the way for the child to ultimately read more fluently. So these next few videos are of a little boy named Griffin, and in these videos you'll see a little boy who has an interesting background that is very similar to many children with CVI. He was born at 25 weeks gestation, 25 weeks gestation. He had some significant intraventricular hemorrhages. He now also has seizures. He has some motor issues, and he has CVI. He still requires quite a few phase 3 interventions, such as orientation and mobility, the ability to gather more information related to social situations. Complexity of images can be very challenging for him. But his mother watched him progress from phase 1 to phase 3. She was his absolute best teacher. And his mother used these principles of salient features to help Griffin learn the code of words. So let's take a look at his videos. The first one you'll see, Griffin is matching words to their accompanying word shape.
Which one? Oh, good. You corrected yourself. Very good. You're right. Okay. Find another card and have it go with its shape. Match it to its shape. Touch the shape it would go with. Okay, good. Good. Okay, find another one. I didn't do a good job with the tape, huh? Okay. Which shape?
And let's...
Very good. It won't stick, but you got it. Okay, and what's left?
Blue.
The next video shows Griffin actually looking at word shapes and considering the word that could possibly fit in there. I would like you to really notice not only is color used, remember we talked about the importance of color remaining important for the duration of the CVI, but his mother also uses comparative language in these videos to discuss how when Griffin makes a mistake with a word, she talks about how it's like another word he knows, but has a certain difference. Comparative language. She's not just teaching him words in isolation for no reason. She wants him to think about how these words might be alike yet different so that he has that flexibility in thinking.
Dad. Not the one I'm holding, this one on the ground.
Dog.
Yes, good job. Now I'm going to show you another one, and you tell me what that word that you see there is.
Caterpillar.
Not caterpillar. Try again. It's long like caterpillar.
Elephant.
Yes, very good, buddy. Now I have some on the dry erase board, okay? So let's cover these up. Are you ready? Come closer. What is this word right here?
Two.
Yes. And this word underneath too?
Green.
Yes. And this word underneath green?
Garden.
Again, you'll see the iPad being used as a way to help support his visual learning of these word shapes.
Griffin, can you tell me what this word is on the iPad?
Shining.
Balin, put that away. Griffin, look at that word.
Apple.
Okay, good. Now, what about the word? What? Okay.
What about the word?
Something happened to the light. What happened to the light? Oh, it went off. Okay. Oopsie, we have an interruption. What about the very bottom word?
Something.
Wait a minute, it switched on me. Here. What about the very bottom word?
Today.
Yep. What about this word over here?
Banana.
Banana. Well, it's not banana, but it does start with a taller letter. Put that.
And then finally, this video is the payoff. That if we really embrace the principles of CVI, if we help the child move through these phases in a way that is meaningful and intentional and powerful, that sometimes we find out that this child who's really complex is actually capable of things we may never have dreamed of. And yet his mother and father's dream that someday their child would read turns out to not be unreasonable at all. So let's take a look at what Griffin does with this book based on his understanding of how words work.
And cookies. We put up decorations. Like
Read that page.
when it was time for the party to begin, nobody was there. Where could they be?
I wonder what happened. What do you think?
I told them not to be sorry. Clifford would like whatever they got for him. They got all ran home to get their gifts.
So I'd like to say that Griffin's ability to read is impressive, but he is not the only child that I have encountered who has learned to read following kind of this sequential process that ultimately leads him to understanding salient features in really abstract ways. He has a lot of work yet to do, and he has a lot of challenges facing him, but I feel quite confident that we will rise to meet those challenges as necessary. His parents have led the team in a really powerful and important way. So the takeaway messages are these. That children with CVI have functional vision that is expected to improve, and the improvements can be measured. You must measure them. You must not guess. Interventions for children with CVI must be precise and designed to match their CVI range score. And finally, that children with CVI and their families depend upon professionals to be competent and experienced in the principles and practices of CVI. Thank you.